Rain lashed against the tall windows of the Whitaker estate, streaking down the glass in erratic rivulets as thunder cracked across the Vermont hills. Inside the nursery, the world was quiet save for the rhythmic creak of the rocking chair and the soft, almost imperceptible sighs of a child asleep. The chandelier above swayed slightly from the gusts outside, casting slow-moving shadows across the room. Julian Whitaker moved down the hallway with heavy footsteps, the sound of his polished shoes muffled by the Persian rugs that had once been Serena's pride. His shoulders, always straight, now carried a slump that didn't belong to a man with his wealth, his power. There had been a time when he filled every room he entered. Now, even within his own home, he passed unnoticed like a ghost, haunted by a grief that refused to loosen its grip. He paused outside the nursery door, instinct tugging at him. He hadn't heard Theo cry in hours. That silence, once longed for, now spiked him with worry. His son had refused food again. The bottles had become a battlefield. Theo would shriek, claw, and turn away, lips trembling, cheeks sunken slightly more each day. The doctors said there was no issue. The nannies came and went, none of them lasting. And so the baby remained hungry, sickly, fragile, a living wound Julian didn't know how to tend. Pushing the door open, Julian stepped into the nursery, and froze. There, in the soft glow of the table lamp, sat Amara Duval. She cradled Theo gently, her long braids falling over one shoulder, her blouse unbuttoned just enough to reveal the startling truth. Theo suckled at her breast, his tiny hands curled against her chest, his expression one of peaceful surrender. Amara rocked him slowly, her gaze fixed on the child as if nothing else in the world mattered. Her touch was practiced, maternal. Tender. For a moment, Julian couldn't speak. The image struck him as something both sacred and profane. And then the fury came. "What the hell do you think you're doing?" His voice rang out like a gunshot, splitting the hush of the room. Amara looked up, startled, but did not flinch. She didn't rise or drop the child. She only looked at him, calmly, her eyes unreadable. "He was hungry, Mr. Whitaker," she said. Her voice was low, steady. "He wouldn't eat. I didn't have time to wait for permission." "You're a housemaid," Julian spat. "Not his mother." "I'm also a nurse," she replied softly. "I've worked in neonatal care. I lost my own child less than a year ago. I'm still producing. When I saw him wasting away, I did what any mother would do." The words landed like a slap. Julian's breath was ragged, his fists clenched. "You fed my son like an animal. Without asking. You crossed a line that you can never uncross." Amara stood now, slowly and with care. She shifted Theo against her shoulder, buttoned her blouse with one hand, and gently patted the baby's back. Theo stirred but did not cry. His cheek, once pallid, now glowed with a faint flush. He had eaten. For the first time in days, he looked content. "I crossed it to save him," Amara said. "You may not understand that right now. But one day, you will." Julian's rage spiraled into a place he hadn't visited in years. The grief, the helplessness, the guilt of not being able to fix his son, not being able to bring back his wife, it all combusted inside him. He stepped forward and, before he could stop himself, struck Amara across the cheek. The sound was sharp, and yet the room remained eerily still. Amara didn't stumble. Her head snapped to the side, and then she turned back, her eyes never leaving his. Theo whimpered. Julian took a step back as though his own hand had burned him. Amara lowered the baby into his crib, tucking a soft blanket around him with the same care she had shown moments earlier. She brushed a kiss against his forehead, then turned toward the door. Her cheek had already begun to redden. "I'll have my things packed by morning," she said. "I expect my final payment will be on the table." Julian said nothing. His hands trembled at his sides. When Amara left the room, the nursery felt colder, emptier than it had in months. Julian stood frozen, staring at his son who now slept deeply, peacefully, without the wince of hunger in his brow. The same child who had refused every bottle, who had kept him up screaming into the night. Now, calm. Full. He leaned over the crib and touched Theo's tiny hand. The boy's fingers curled instinctively around his father's. Warm. Alive. Not just surviving, but soothed. And for the first time in all his grief and pride and desperate rage, Julian Whittaker began to wonder if perhaps he had not saved his son at all. Perhaps she had. Down the hallway, Amara walked alone, head high, though her cheek stung and her heart ached. She had known this might happen, but she had chosen to do what was right, not what was safe. It was a lesson life had taught her more than once. And though she had no way of knowing what came next, deep within her she sensed that what had started tonight was far bigger than one child, one man, one moment. Something had shifted. The storm outside raged on. But in the heart of the Whittaker estate, something else had begun to stir. Not destruction. But awakening. The morning after the storm, the Whittaker estate stood drenched in gray. Mist rolled low over the hills, curling around the wrought iron fences like fingers too long in mourning. Within the great house, where chandeliers once sparkled for gala nights and the halls echoed with laughter and fine music, silence had returned, heavy, unresolved, and expectant. Julian sat alone at the edge of the grand dining table, untouched coffee cooling beside him. The paper had been delivered but remained folded, unread. He could hear the distant cooing of Theo through the nursery monitor, soft and content. It should have brought comfort. Instead, it brought shame. He couldn't stop replaying the moment, the angle of her face as his hand connected, the way she refused to look afraid, the unbearable softness of his son's sleeping breath right after. Julian had always prided himself on control, on measured responses and perfect optics. The slap wasn't just cruel, it was beneath everything he believed himself to be. The door creaked open, and Margot Whittaker entered, elegant even in mourning. She moved with the grace of a woman who had seen too much and spoken of too little. Her pearl earrings gleamed faintly in the morning gloom. "You look like a man who's just remembered what he used to be," she said, taking the seat across from him without waiting to be invited. Julian looked up. His voice rasped from disuse. "She's leaving." Margot didn't ask who. She knew. "She saved that boy, you know," she said, stirring sugar into her tea. "No one else could." "I know." Julian's voice cracked. "That's what makes it worse." Margot raised a brow. "Worse?" "She did what I couldn't. What none of the doctors or specialists or nannies could. And I punished her for it." Margot took a long sip of her tea, then set the cup down with a soft clink. "Grief makes men into cowards, Julian. But shame can make them dangerous." He turned away, looking out the tall window where the fog clung to the hedges like spider silk. "I hit her," he said flatly. Margot didn't gasp or scold. She simply watched him, her silence louder than any rebuke. "I should have fired her the moment she stepped out of bounds," he added, more to himself than her. "But I can't. I won't. Because she did the right thing. And I didn't." Upstairs, Amara folded the last of her clothes into a worn leather bag. Her hands were steady, but her chest tightened with every movement. The room was spare, simple, unlike the opulence of the rest of the house. She'd never intended to stay long, and yet she'd planted something of herself here. A book left open on the nightstand. A photograph tucked into the mirror's frame. A toy she bought for Theo still resting near the window. She looked at it now, a small wooden elephant. She'd carved her name in tiny letters on the underside, a quiet reminder of her presence in his life. A reminder she feared would soon vanish like everything else that ever mattered. There was a knock at the door. She didn't answer. Julian let himself in anyway. He looked exhausted. His shirt hung loose, hair unkempt, eyes red-rimmed. For a man of wealth and stature, he looked almost human. "I came to say thank you," he said. Amara didn't look at him. "That's not why you came." "You're right. I also came to apologize." That made her pause. "I was out of my mind," he went on, stepping into the room with slow reverence, as if it no longer belonged to him. "I've been drowning since Serena died. You walked into the middle of that storm and did the one thing no one else could, you saved my son." Amara turned, her expression unreadable. "You can't take back what you did," she said, her voice soft but clear. "No," Julian said. "But I can ask you to stay." She let out a dry, humorless laugh. "As what?" "The wet nurse. The help." "As the woman who knows my son better than anyone," he said. "As someone who cares enough to risk everything when I was too blind to see what he needed." There was a long silence between them. Not awkward. Not tense. Just full. Finally, she spoke. "You're lucky Theo will never remember this. But I will. I know." She nodded slowly. "Then this isn't for you. It's for him." He exhaled as if something had been waiting to leave his chest for weeks. "You don't have to decide now. I already have." She picked up the elephant and placed it gently in the bag. "I'll stay until you find someone else you trust. But only because Theo deserves stability. Not because you apologized." Julian bowed his head. "That's more than I deserve." Margot watched from the end of the hall as Julian stepped out of the room. She saw the way Amara stood tall, not with defiance, but with dignity. She saw the red fading from her cheek, and the fire still burning behind her eyes. That afternoon, a delivery arrived addressed to Theo. A rocking chair, hand-carved, engraved with a quote from Serena's favorite poem. Amara found it on the porch, a note tucked inside. For the one who truly saw him. There were no signatures. Inside the house, Theo laughed for the first time in weeks. A full, bubbling giggle that rang down the hall like music. Amara looked toward the nursery and smiled, not for Julian, not even for herself, but for the small soul she had chosen to love, against all odds. She didn't yet know what shadows waited beneath the surface of this estate. But something told her this family's story was not nearly finished. Not by a long shot. The estate had returned to a cold stillness, though the storm had long passed. Inside the sprawling halls of the Whittaker home, the air now felt unnaturally quiet, as if something had retreated into the walls, waiting for the next unraveling. Amara had kept her distance since that morning. She did not avoid Theo, never him, but she moved through the house like a shadow, saying little, asking nothing. Julian, for his part, respected her silence. He knew she was there only for the boy. And though they now shared something raw and complicated, no words passed between them beyond what was needed. Days passed. Theo's health began to bloom. His cries grew stronger, fuller. He reached out when he saw Amara, babbled to her with the trust only a child could give so freely. Julian watched, always at a distance, unsure whether to feel gratitude or guilt. One afternoon, when the light fell soft and golden through the upper windows, Amara found herself inside Serena's old dressing room. She had come in search of Theo's baby blanket, Serena's favorite. But something else caught her attention. An antique mirror hung on the far wall, its frame carved with delicate vines and roses. But it tilted slightly, uneven on one side. Curious, Amara stepped closer. She reached behind the frame, her fingers brushing against a corner of something wedged behind it. With a careful tug, a leather-bound book slipped into her hands. It was old but lovingly preserved. A ribbon marked its place. The scent of lavender still clung faintly to the pages. Her breath hitched. Serena's handwriting filled the first page. It wasn't meant to be found, at least not easily. The entries began tenderly, reflections on motherhood, her love for Julian, how fiercely she had wanted Theo. But slowly, the tone shifted. Her words became wary, cryptic. She wrote of unsettling family conversations, closed doors, silences too deep to be casual. There were repeated mentions of someone named Silas. A name Amara had never heard. Serena spoke of whispers, of photographs missing from albums, of a boy whose name had been erased from the family entirely. The writing became hurried toward the end. If anything happens to me, find the portrait in the cellar. The boy is real. Amara closed the journal, her hands trembling slightly. That evening, long after the rest of the house had gone quiet, she crept down into the cellar. The stairs groaned beneath her weight. Dust coated everything, old furniture, broken frames, forgotten trunks. The light from her phone caught a canvas leaning against the far wall, half buried under boxes. She knelt, dragging it out carefully. Beneath the dusty cloth was a portrait. A boy, maybe 16, with soft eyes and Julian's angular jaw. His expression was solemn but alive, like he was holding a thought he couldn't say aloud. Painted in exquisite detail, the signature in the corner bore a name long buried. Silas Whittaker. Amara stood frozen, staring at the canvas. It was unmistakably someone from the family, yet the name had never once been spoken. She had worked in this house, heard stories, seen photos, but never of him. She knew then what Serena had meant. Something had been hidden. Something big. The next morning, Amara brought the portrait to Margot, who sat at the breakfast table reading the paper, her tea still steaming. When she saw the painting, her face drained of color. For a long time, she said nothing. Her fingers reached forward, grazing the painted cheek with a reverence only a mother could carry. "You found him," Margot whispered. "After all these years." Amara sat opposite her. "Who was he?" Margot didn't answer right away. She stared at the face of the boy as if memorizing it all over again. Silas was Julian's older brother. "My firstborn. Brilliant. Kind. Strange, in the most beautiful ways. He used to draw whole worlds in his notebooks, talked about things he claimed he could see that no one else could. You're Serena." She loved him. She always thought he saw more than the rest of us. Why isn't he remembered? Amara asked softly. Margot's eyes filled. Because my husband hated anything he couldn't control. Reginald thought Silas was weak, defective. He sent him away to a private hospital when Silas was just 16. Said it was for his own good. Said he'd return when he was normal. But he never did. And Julian? Margot shook her head slowly. Julian was 10. He loved Silas, adored him, followed him everywhere. When Silas disappeared, we told him he'd gone to boarding school. Then, we just stopped speaking of him. Reginald made sure of that. Amara's voice was quiet. Serena was trying to uncover the truth. She always asked questions, Margot replied. She knew the stories didn't line up. She knew Julian had gaps in his childhood. I think she was trying to tell him, but she ran out of time. Amara felt something settle in her chest. An old ache that wasn't hers but now pulsed through her all the same. Does Julian remember him? She asked. He remembers something, Margot said. But not clearly. Sometimes I wonder if he blocked it out. Or if Reginald took it from him with fear. Amara stood. He needs to remember now. For Theo. For Silas. Margot reached for her hand. Be careful. The past in this family doesn't go quietly. But Amara only nodded, her voice calm and clear. Neither do I. Julian stood before the portrait of Silas as if it were a stranger's face carved from smoke. The boy's eyes followed him wherever he moved, painted in a way that made them feel alive, watchful, knowing. For several minutes, Julian didn't speak. His fingers hovered near the frame but didn't touch it, as if laying hands on it might break whatever thin veil still separated memory from revelation. I knew him, Julian said finally, voice dry, cracking like ice under pressure. He used to call me Little Fox. Amara said nothing. She only watched. I thought he was imaginary, Julian continued, slower now. My father said I had made him up. When I asked about Silas, I was punished. Told I was too old for fantasies. He turned away, staring into the vast living room where the morning light filtered through towering windows. But I remember him. He was real. He used to read me stories. Draw me strange creatures with wings and eyes on their hands. He was gentle. Amara stepped forward. He wasn't imaginary. He was your brother. And Serena knew. Julian flinched at his wife's name, as if it carried fresh weight now that it was linked to the boy no one would speak of. She left me clues, he murmured. I didn't see them. She wanted you to find the truth, Amara said. She must have known it mattered, for you, for Theo. Julian sank into the nearest chair. His suit was still pressed, his hair still immaculate, but he looked like a man unraveling from the inside. My father erased him, he whispered. Erased him from the family like a stain. Amara sat opposite him. Margot told me where he was sent. A private sanitarium. Everpine. Julian closed his eyes. I remember that name. I always thought it was some old resort we used to visit. But now he wasn't sure what was real. What had been told to him, and what he'd buried to survive. She said Silas was different, Amara offered. Did you know what that meant? Julian opened his eyes again, slowly. He talked to people no one else saw. Heard music in silence. Once, he told me the trees whispered secrets at night. My father called him broken. My mother called him sensitive. I didn't know which was true. But I loved him. I know that. Amara leaned forward. You said he read to you? Julian nodded. Every night. Until one day he just disappeared. My father said he'd gone away for school. That I was to forget about him. He took down all the pictures. Gave away his clothes. And when I asked again, I was locked in my room for 3 days. There was a long, aching pause between them. I never asked after that, Julian admitted. I never dared. The words fell like stones into the space between them. Amara watched his face and saw something shift. Not rage. Not guilt. Something heavier. A slow awakening that came too late. I let him vanish, Julian whispered. And I never questioned it. Even when Serena, even when she asked. She didn't blame you, Amara said gently. She knew it was too big for a child. But she also knew one day you'd be strong enough to face it. Julian looked up at her. What do I do now? You find him. The answer was so simple, so honest, that it took Julian a moment to absorb. Everpine, he repeated. Does it still exist? Not officially, Amara said. It was shut down over a decade ago. But the records might still be there. Or with the state. Julian stood, the movement abrupt. For a second, he looked like his old self, decisive, powerful, unshaken. But there was something different in his eyes now. Something broken open. I need to know what happened to him, he said. If he's still alive, or if he died thinking we all forgot him. Amara nodded. Then we go. The drive to Everpine took them 3 hours. It sat at the edge of the state, half swallowed by forest, its rusting gate leaning under the weight of decades. The building itself was built of stone and age, its windows covered in grime, its entrance chained. But the old sign still lingered above the archway, Everpine Residential Institute for Youth Wellness, a cruel mask for what it truly had been. Julian stood before it for a long moment, his hands in his coat pockets, jaw set. "I dreamed about this place," he said. "When I was a boy. I used to have nightmares about Silas locked behind doors I couldn't open." They managed to gain access through a contact Julian still had in state records. Inside, the walls were peeling, mold creeping into corners, papers strewn across rooms where order had long since dissolved into decay. In the archives room, they found patient records stacked in dusty cabinets. Amara's fingers ran along the spines until one stood out. Silas Whittaker. Admitted, May 2000. Diagnosis, schizoaffective tendencies, creative delusions, non-compliant behavior. Julian read the file in silence. Silas had been kept in isolation. Restricted visitation. Administered strong medication. Marked repeatedly for failure to respond to therapeutic correction. He'd drawn strange things in his notebooks, gates, wings, light pouring from underground roots. The staff labeled him difficult. One nurse noted, "Sweet boy. Gentle. Doesn't belong here." And then came the final entry. Deceased. March 2007. No family claimed the body. Cremated. Julian couldn't move. He stood there, his hand clenched around the paper as if squeezing it could somehow rewind time. "He died thinking we forgot him," he said softly. At 23. Alone. Amara placed a hand on his shoulder. "But he didn't vanish. You found him." Julian's voice broke. "Too late." "No," Amara said. "Not too late. Not for Theo. Not for you. And not for him." Julian turned to her, and for the first time, she saw tears falling down his face. He didn't wipe them away. "We bring him home," he whispered. And somewhere beyond the trees, where the wind rustled the leaves and the mist rolled over the forgotten paths, it felt as though a boy with soft eyes and gentle hands finally heard his name again. Silas. Silas Whittaker. Not forgotten. Not imaginary. Real. And finally, remembered. Everpine lingered in Julian's mind long after they left its crumbling stone gates. The scent of mildew and rust clung to his clothes as though the place had tried to follow him home. In the days that followed their visit, the estate changed. Or perhaps it was Julian who had changed. He spent more time in the nursery. Held Theo longer. Watched him sleep with a kind of reverence, as if realizing now, too late for Silas, that the smallest moments were the ones that mattered most. Amara noticed the shift but said little. She remained quiet, steady, always near but never imposing. She had become more than just the woman who had saved a child's life. She was now the keeper of the truth Julian hadn't known he needed. And the only one brave enough to help him face it. A week after returning from Everpine, Julian called a meeting in the drawing room. Margot, seated at the far end, wore her grief like a shawl. Her hands trembled slightly as she lifted a glass of water to her lips. Julian stood near the fireplace, no longer seeking its warmth but something deeper, understanding. Amara sat beside the portrait of Silas, the canvas propped against the wall like a guest who had finally been invited to speak. "I want to bring him home," Julian began, his voice stronger than before. "There should be a grave. A place for him. Not some line in a file marked unclaimed remains." Margot nodded, but her eyes were far away. "He was cremated," she said. "Your father made sure no ashes were delivered to us. He said it would bring closure." Julian looked to her. Closure for who? Margot's throat worked to form an answer. In the end, she said nothing. Amara broke the silence. "We could ask the county if anything remains, ashes, items, drawings. There's always something left behind." Julian nodded. "I've already started the paperwork." Then he turned to Margot. "Why didn't you fight him?" The question sat heavily in the air. Margot stared at her son. I did. In my own way. I saved Silas's letters. His drawings. I kept his portrait. When your father threatened to destroy it, I hid it in the cellar. She took a breath, fingers tightening around her glass. But I was a woman under a man like Reginald Whittaker. Everything I loved, he treated as weakness. And Silas, he was everything I loved. I couldn't protect him, not the way he needed. But I never forgot him. Julian crossed the room and knelt beside her. For the first time since his childhood, he took her hand. We're going to restore his name. Publicly. I've hired an attorney. We're filing to add him to the family record, and to sue Everpine for the treatment he endured. Margot looked up, eyes brimming. He'd like that. Julian's gaze drifted to Amara. I want to do it right. For him. For Serena. For Theo. Amara nodded, her voice quiet. Then let's begin. The legal process unfolded slowly. The Whittaker name carried weight in courtrooms, but the stain of the past ran deep. Amara and Julian worked closely with the attorney, sifting through Everpine's old records. They discovered Silas's sketchbooks, filled with ethereal images, winged creatures, constellations, forests blooming from broken buildings. He had poured beauty into madness, light into the dark corners where they'd locked him away. They found letters too, unsent notes addressed to Jules, full of hope and longing. I dream you'll find me. That one day you'll walk through those gates and tell me the trees are still singing at home. I hope Theo exists. I hope someone like you loves someone like me. Julian read that line a dozen times before he could breathe again. Then came the public reckoning. The media caught wind of the case. A Whittaker heir erased by his family. Institutionalized and left to die. The headlines were brutal. Journalists called, cameras circled the gate. Julian gave a single statement. My brother was not sick. He was silenced. That ends now. But with exposure came backlash. Old allies withdrew. Business partners questioned Julian's decisions. Rumors surfaced, some whispered that he was unraveling like Silas. That grief had pushed him off course. Julian stood firm. And Amara remained beside him. During a quiet evening after a particularly harsh article aired, Julian found her in the nursery, rocking Theo to sleep. The boy cooed softly, fingers curled around Amara's necklace. You've changed everything, Julian said from the doorway. Amara didn't look up. You changed. I just lit the match. He stepped into the room, watching Theo's peaceful face. Do you believe he'd be proud of me? Julian asked. Amara finally met his eyes. I think he's been waiting for this moment his whole life. Weeks later, the memorial was held. It was small. Intimate. Held on the estate grounds under the willow trees where Silas once drew for hours. A new headstone had been placed beside Serena's. Silas Whittaker. 1984 to 2007. He saw the world not as it was, but as it could be. Julian gave the eulogy. His voice was clear, steady. My brother was gentle. He was strange and beautiful. He deserved to be loved, not hidden. For too long, this family survived on silence. That ends now. My son will grow up knowing his uncle's name. Margot placed a single sketchbook on the grave, her hands trembling. He was magic, she whispered. Amara, standing a few feet away, felt something uncoil within her. Not relief. Not joy. But truth. Finally given air. Later, after the guests had left and the candles burned low, Julian approached her. I don't want you to leave, he said. She turned to him, her face unreadable. You've said that before, she replied. After you hit me. I know, he said. And I meant it. But not like this. How do you mean it now? As the woman who gave my son life when he wouldn't take it. Who uncovered my brother when I couldn't remember him. As someone I respect. And trust. And maybe, he hesitated. Maybe even need. Amara didn't answer right away. Then she looked up at the sky. The stars were bright tonight, unashamed in their brilliance. I'll stay, she said. For Theo. Julian nodded, though something in his chest swelled in a way that had nothing to do with fatherhood. And for me? He asked. Amara smiled, small and sad and full of hope. We'll see. The estate no longer echoed with silence. That was the first change Amara noticed. Where once the air had been heavy with absence, Serena's death, Silas's erasure, Julian's grief, it now moved differently. Lighter. Not joyful, not yet. But alive. As though the truth had cleared a space where something real could grow again. Theo thrived. His cheeks filled out, his laughter returned, bright and bubbling like spring water after winter. Julian, too, seemed transformed. His mornings were no longer spent buried in boardroom calls and business reports. He rose early, took Theo for walks in the garden. Read aloud from the same book Silas had once read to him. Amara watched it all unfold from her quiet corner of the house, unsure of where she now fit. She had never intended to become anything more than a temporary caretaker. Yet every day, the lines blurred. She was the one Theo ran to, the one who knew his cries from his giggles, his allergies from his dreams. She still held him when he woke from night terrors. She still nursed him when no one else could soothe him. One evening, Julian found her sitting on the edge of the nursery rocker, Theo asleep against her chest, his hand tangled in her necklace. She won't be forgotten either, he said quietly, approaching the cradle. Amara looked up. Serena. Julian nodded. I've decided to start a foundation. In her name. And in Silas's. For children like him. Misunderstood. Unseen. Amara's lips parted, but no words came. Instead, she let the moment hold its own weight. It was the first time Julian had said her name without sorrow. She left clues, he continued. She always knew. She wanted this truth to come out. She was brave, Amara said. She knew what it would cost. Julian took a breath and sat beside her. I've been thinking about you. Amara tensed. About everything you've done. About what it means, what you mean. Julian. He held up a hand. I'm not asking anything of you. I just need you to understand something. She waited. He looked down at Theo, his fingers brushing the baby's arm. You nursed my son when I couldn't feed him. You uncovered my brother when I couldn't remember him. You stayed, even when I was cruel. You're not a servant, Amara. You never were. You're his guardian. You're part of this family. Amara blinked, her gaze dropping to the boy in her arms. I was never trying to become anything, she said softly. I just didn't want to walk away from a child in pain. And in doing so, Julian said, you gave me back my son. And my soul. There was silence after that. Not heavy, but full. A silence that spoke of understanding. Of choices made not with words, but with hands, actions, love. Later that night, long after the house had fallen into sleep, Amara sat alone in the small room Serena had once used as a studio. The room where drawings of Silas had been hidden, where letters were tucked between floorboards, where truth had waited to be seen. On the desk, under moonlight, sat a sealed envelope. Her name was written in Serena's hand. With trembling fingers, Amara opened it. Inside was a note. If you're reading this, it means you did what I hoped. You found Silas. You helped Jules remember. You fed my son not just with milk, but with mercy. I know he would have turned you away. He's always been proud. But he loves deeply, even when he doesn't know how to show it. And you were the only one I trusted to love them both when I no longer could. Thank you. There were tears now, silent but warm. Amara folded the letter and held it to her chest. Milk and ashes. That's what had brought them all together. Her body, still weeping for the child she'd lost, had nourished the child who refused to eat. And Silas, his ashes, unclaimed and forgotten, had led Julian to reclaim the soul of his family. Love came in strange forms. Through wounds. Through memory. Through grief. Through rage. But here, in this house of silence and sorrow, it had come roaring back to life. The following morning, the house hummed with preparations. Julian's lawyers had confirmed that the final step of the legal battle had closed. The lawsuit against Everpine had ended in a public settlement. Though the sanitarium was long defunct, the names of the doctors and trustees had been released. Apologies were issued. Funds redirected to the Whitaker Foundation for Youth Restoration. Julian held a press conference that evening. Amara stood in the back, arms crossed, her presence unnoticed by the crowd, but deeply felt by Julian. He took the stage. There was a time, he began, when I believed silence was dignity. That hiding pain was strength. My father taught me that. And I believed him. Until I nearly lost my son to that same silence. He paused, letting the room breathe with him. My brother, Silas Whitaker, was institutionalized at 20. Not because he was dangerous, but because he was different. He died alone. Unclaimed. Forgotten. My wife, Serena, tried to show me the truth. A woman named Amara helped me see it. He looked to the crowd, then to the cameras. My name is Julian Whitaker, heir to a legacy of silence. Today, I changed that. From now on, the Whitaker name stands for remembrance. For truth. For healing. The crowd erupted in applause. Julian found Amara in the back, after the cameras had gone. He walked toward her, not as the man who once ruled over her household, but as someone reborn. You still want to leave? He asked. Amara tilted her head. I'm not sure anymore. I've spent my life going where I was needed. I never stayed. Julian reached into his coat and handed her an envelope. Inside, her name again. Only this time, in his handwriting. She opened it. It was not a check. It was a deed. To a cottage on the far side of the estate. The one Serena once used as a greenhouse. For you, he said. If you ever decide you want to stay. Not as a maid. Not even as a nurse. But as Amara. She folded the paper slowly. Her eyes met his. And if I don't? Julian smiled gently. Then I will still owe you everything. She didn't answer. She didn't need to. Autumn arrived quietly on the Whitaker estate, brushing the treetops in gold and copper. The wind had lost its summer softness, trading it for something crisp, something that stirred the leaves like old pages of a half-finished book. A year had passed since Amara first stepped into the nursery as a maid and unknowingly stepped into the heart of a fractured family. The cottage on the far edge of the estate now breathed with life. Amara had moved in months ago, not with fanfare, not with promises, but with purpose. She had painted the walls herself. Planted lavender by the window. Filled the shelves with books, some her own, some Serena's. Theo played there now, laughing in the garden as Julian watched from the steps. Julian visited every day. Not out of duty, but devotion. He had become a different man, not perfect, but present. Where once his empire had been his obsession, now his son was his center. The business ran itself under new leadership. Julian remained on the board, but only in title. What he built with money, he had now learned to rebuild with memory and meaning. Silas's legacy had taken shape. The Whitaker Foundation had opened its first home, a place for neurodivergent children who had slipped through the cracks of schools and systems. They named it the Silas House. On its opening day, Julian stood beside Amara, Margot, and dozens of others who had come not to mourn a tragedy, but to witness its transformation. Inside, a mural painted by a local artist stretched across the wall. It depicted a boy with golden eyes, floating among stars, holding the hand of a smaller child, a mirror of Julian and Silas, reimagined in hope. Margot stood silently before it for a long time. "He would have loved this," she whispered. Julian touched her shoulder gently. "So would Serena." Amara lingered near the back of the room, content to watch without being watched. She was no longer invisible, but she didn't seek the light. The work mattered more than the applause. After the event, Theo ran into her arms. "Mama," he called her now. Without hesitation. Without question. Julian never corrected him. That night, under the stars, Julian and Amara sat outside her cottage while Theo slept in the room next to them. The night was cool, scented with firewood and fading roses. "I've been thinking," Julian said. "About writing it all down. The whole story." Amara raised an eyebrow. "You? A memoir?" He smiled. "Not for the public. For Theo. So he'll know where he came from. Who his mother was. Who his uncle was. Who you are." Amara looked at him carefully. "And who you were." Julian's eyes flickered. "Especially that." She nodded slowly. "Then start with Silas. Don't make him a footnote." "He won't be," Julian promised. The wind rustled the leaves above them. Somewhere in the house, Theo stirred and then settled again. The peace was fragile but real. "You know," Amara said softly, "there's still something I've never told you." Julian turned toward her, curious. "When I lost my child, it almost destroyed me. I stopped believing in anything. God. Purpose. Myself. I thought maybe my milk staying was punishment. A reminder." Julian's brow furrowed. "I didn't know. No one did. Until I held Theo. Until he took what my own child never could. It wasn't punishment. It was preservation. My body knew I had more to give." Julian reached for her hand. Held it gently. "You gave him life. And you gave me a way back to mine." Amara met his gaze. "Then don't waste it." He didn't. In the months that followed, Julian continued to tell the story, to Theo, to the foundation, to anyone who asked where the real wealth of the Whittaker family came from. Not from boardrooms or bank accounts. But from a woman who dared to act with courage. From a forgotten brother. From ashes and milk and grief transformed. Margot passed quietly that winter, in her sleep. Her final letter, left on her nightstand, was addressed to both of them. "You've given back to this family what Reginald took. My only regret is not doing it sooner. Amara, thank you for being the daughter I never had the courage to claim. Julian, thank you for becoming the man I knew still lived inside you. Take care of each other. And tell Theo everything." They buried her beside Serena and Silas. 3 stones now stood in the family garden. Amara placed flowers every Sunday. Julian taught Theo to read each name out loud. Years passed. Theo grew. The cottage became a second home, then the main one. Amara never left. She never had to. One day, as Theo ran through the orchard, calling for his father, he stumbled across the old cellar where Silas's portrait had first been hidden. "What's in there?" he asked. Julian smiled. "A secret we're not ashamed of anymore." "Can I see?" "Not yet," he said. "But one day. When you're ready." Amara watched them from the porch. Her heart full, her journey complete, not an ending, but a transformation. She was never just a maid. Never just a nurse. She had become something else entirely. A keeper of stories. A breaker of silence. A mother by choice. A legacy by love. And the boy she had saved, he would one day carry the story forward. Not in shame. But in truth. And in that truth, the Whittaker name found its redemption, not from wealth, but from memory. The story would live. Because she had dared to tell it. If this story moved you, don't just watch. Collision become part of the journey. Hit subscribe for more powerful true life stories of wealth, loss, and redemption. Bell turn on notifications so you never miss a moment that could change how you see the world. Because here, every millionaire has a secret. And every story leaves a mark.